I'm Jack Neely. I'll be your flight attendant today. And our basic training course for Realm Linux. What we're going to cover today is a bit about what Realm Linux is, moving in towards setting up Realm Linux and setting up an install, and how the basic installation stuff works. Moving from there into how one manages Realm Linux through the life cycle of each machine. We'll talk about what support resources we have, where documentation is, how to pester me. I'm going to show you a new project of mine, the Realm Linux Training Screencasts, in hopes that that might help with our documentation and training needs. Sort of the goal of today's training session and Friday's training session, which will be the exact same presentation, is to replay our basic Realm Linux training to integrate our progress into moving toward a Puppet-based infrastructure and away from our bconfig infrastructure, and to try to set people up and get them some working knowledge of how we're integrating Puppet into Realm Linux with the upcoming Puppet Camp on Thursday, May 16th. The May 16th Puppet Camp event is basically Puppet Lab's sort of mini conference. They travel all around the world doing Puppet camps, really 1, 2, or 3 of them every month. So we should have folks from all over the Eastern Seaboard here at that Puppet Camp. Folks in the Puppet community will be giving presentations. So it probably, actually, I know it won't be specific to how we do Realm Linux here at NC State, but it's one of the best training opportunities as far as Puppet that we can have access to. So, moving onward, a lot of people always ask me, what is Realm Linux? Realm Linux is a project to create and maintain an open source Linux computing platform for NC State University. It's designed for servers. It's designed for your workstation. It's designed for labs. It's designed for compute-intensive workstations. The idea is to be a versatile framework that folks can use, adjust, contribute to, and deploy as best suits their environment. Really, Jack, what is Realm Linux? Realm Linux is really just a collection of additional packages and configuration. Packages like OpenAFS, our configuration management tool, whether that be Puppet or bconfig, some authentication tools, a couple Perl and Python additional libraries. And of course, the configuration. People always ask me what Realm Linux is, and a common misconception is that Realm Linux is a distribution. Realm Linux is not a distribution, even though our terminology kind of implies that it is. Realm Linux is additional packages and configuration on top of a Linux distribution. We've used Red Hat Enterprise Linux back since the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 3 days, which has been about 9 or 10 years at this point. Occasionally, there is the Fedora version for testing purposes. Before Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we used Red Hat Linux, which was Red Hat's predecessor to Fedora back in the dark ages. What's in it for me? Why would I want to run Realm Linux? Ryu. Realm Linux is sort of a environment, is a concept that allows us all to work together with each other across units and collaborate and work together. As all of us know, when we work together, we build bigger and better things. When we're divided up into each little silo, things don't always have the opportunity to work as well as we would like. So institutional knowledge is always at the top of my list of why folks would want to run Realm Linux as their Linux platform here at NC State. If you have questions, problems, there's lots of folks with familiarity with Realm Linux, lots of folks that can help you. Of course, supported by the OIT Help Desk, supported by the Tier 2 Help Desk, supported by myself and my cohort in crime, Brendan. If we can't figure it out, we actually have a Red Hat support contract. We support centralized or localized root passwords, centralized or localized lists of systems administrators who can administer the machine, who can become root, centralized or localized methods of deploying lists of people that can log into the machine and use the machine, your office staff, or all of the students in physical and mathematical sciences, for example. We have configuration management tools, including automated installations. We want to give you guys the tools to be able to do more with less. So if we can give you the tools to automate basic tasks, we hope that you guys will have more time for more complex things. Realm Linux works outside of the NCSU network. I have a lab at the University of Asheville. It's kind of scary, but it does work. Pretty much anywhere you guys can get access to our LDAP server, Realm Linux will work and be happy. Security errata and system updates are also done automatically for you. A couple definitions as we move on. I refer to department or Realm Linux department often. And a department is a string that sort of delineates a domain of control. So physical and mathematical sciences has machines that are separate from the College of Engineering's machines. And that's just a short string that usually somehow identifies who you are and enables our machines to be somewhat labeled and for you to key off of with configuration management, with cron scripts, and other fun tools. I think everyone pretty much knows what Web Kickstart is. That's our automated installation service. Red Hat Network, or RHN, is our upstream source for Red Hat errata and packages. Also called the Red Hat Network Satellite, which is the appliance that we have on campus. Red Hat is introducing newer technology that's replacing RHN called subscription management. If you're on Red Hat's website, you'll see the Red Hat Network usually referred to as Red Hat Network Classic or Classic Management. Red Hat is trying to phase away from RHN to subscription management stuff. We don't yet use any of the subscription management stuff. So all those annoying error messages for Yum that says you're using RHN Classic, that's a message that we're actually expecting until your machine is working right. When we refer to a systems administrator, usually we refer to a trusted NCSU account holder that is a full-time staffer. We kind of flex that a little bit to include students or part-time people that have been sponsored or approved by an IT staffer, but I try to keep that pretty specific of what a systems administrator. PTS groups. If anyone doesn't know what PTS group is, they're sort of like Unix groups, except they work in AFS. So more about departments. Clearly, departments play a large role in Realm Linux. And here are a common list of examples. These are actually real departments that exist today. There are lowercase strings. That includes the hyphen character. The hyphen character indicates parent-child relationships. So in the Office of Information Technology, we have an OIT department, which is further subdivided into about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different departments, depending on the phase of the moon, pretty much. So the OIT VM department is a child department of the OIT department. So moving on into Web Kickstart. Web Kickstart is designed to help us with the Trusted Systems Administrator concept. In order to install a machine, you need to place a config file in AFS that Web Kickstart can use. Only system administrators can put those files there, so when that machine is installed, we can infer very directly that a Trusted Systems Administrator has configured and installed that machine. Whether you simply put the config file down and sent a grad student out there to kick the machine to actually install it, we still infer that a Trusted System Administrator has done that configuration. Supportability, Web Kickstart helps us make sure that certain bits of configuration get applied to your machine. Your bconfig or your Puppet configuration tools have been set up and configuration is applied appropriately. The Trusted Systems Administrator concept, etc. Modularity. Before I came to OIT and trying to maintain Realm Linux, I had a bunch of hand-me-down machines. I could install multiple machines. I could create pools of these machines and make highly available clusters that I could do DR principles upon. They work great. But they're hand-me-down machines, and they're all different from each other. So what I would usually do is create a Web Kickstart config for each machine, and that config would do the partitioning, the hardware-related aspects of the install, because it was different on each machine. But I could include or use another Web Kickstart config that would set up my software configuration on that machine. So even though the machines were different, I still had identical software stacks. I still made use of modularity. In a similar way, cloning machines is just as simple as making symlinks in AFS. Ideally, the Web Kickstart system combined with our configuration management system defines our known good state for a machine. So we have a recorded list of facts about a machine that we know we can put a machine in and we know it works. So if we come back to a machine and we need to figure out what's wrong with the machine, in some cases it's simply easier and more productive to reinstall the machine than it is to sit down and figure out what's actually wrong with the machine. So from here we move more into the basics of Web Kickstart. Yet I have made this lovely video in my attempt to create a series of Realm Linux training videos. Since we're now at Google University, we're on YouTube, and all Web 2.0. So I thought I would demonstrate that particular video. Hi, I'm Jack Neely, and welcome to the very first Realm Linux training screencast. Today we're going to talk about installing a Realm Linux machine with Web Kickstart. First things first, we need to identify the host we want to install. The host we're going to install is kdnguest02.unity.ncsu.edu. This is one of my test fields. We need to check and make sure this host is in DNS correctly to be installed. So we bring up Proteus, and let's search for this machine. Alright, our search has returned two objects, the host object and the IP object. Let's start with the host object. This host is already in DNS and is associated with the IP address that we want to use. So let's check out that IP address object. This IP address is set as DHCP reserved and has a MAC address associated with it. That enables DHCP to work. We also want to check out the MAC pool status of this IP address. So we edit, and this is the same screen you see when you originally set up this IP address. You give it a host name, the MAC address you want to associate with it, and you assign it to a MAC pool. In this case, PixieAll is already in the default for this drop-down box, so we know that's the current setting of this IP. If it's not, you click the button, find PXE All, and then hit the update button. But this is already in DNS, so we're set to go. Now let's check to make sure those DNS changes are effective. So we attempt to resolve KVM guest 02, and it comes back to the IP address that we want to use. We also want to check to make sure it reverse resolves. And it reverse resolves, and we get the same fully quantified domain name, FQDN, as we started with. If the IP address doesn't reverse resolve properly, the install won't work. So we've got that set up. Now we're assuming that you've been given access to a Realm Linux department in the past or just very recently, and its web kickstart directory. Realm Linux departments are a way to delineate groups of machines from each other. So OIT has its machines, which are managed by different people than the College of Engineering's machines. So for this video's sake, we are going to be assigned a test department. So we go to where the web kickstart configs are stored, and they live in AFS BP system config Linux kickstart /configs. And you can see there's a bunch of directories for each department here. So let's finally get into the test directory. This test directory is set up exactly like I would set up a new web kickstart directory for a new department. It has an example, and it has a use directory which contains a departmental include file. That departmental include file has some encryption keys used to set up each host, and they usually stay the same for each host in the department. So rather than copying and pasting them to each config, we use a use or include file. Okay, let's go ahead and look at that example now. This is a simple example that sets up the very basics for a simple Realm Linux server. The version keyword here is required, and it states the exact version of the OS we're going to install. In this case, Red Hat Enterprise Linux Server version 6 with the x86-64 architecture. You can find all the version keys on the web kickstart webpage. Our second line is our use file that includes our departmental includes, and this is the path to that include file. The package keyword defines the group of packages that we wish to install. We're doing a simple server. Realm Linux server is the simplest stripped down bare metal sort of server. We don't usually run X on servers, hence the skipx command. And finally, you can include any number of post-install scripts after a %post key. We have just a simple echo post running into a file in root's home directory. This script runs after the install is complete and before the machine reboots for the first time. So let's look at that departmental use file. I'm going to look at the template so I don't reveal any encryption keys to the public. But this template is exactly the same as the departmental include file with some fake numbers here. So up here at the top, we have some stuff about bconfig. If you already have a web kickstart directory or used one in the past, you might be set up to use bconfig as our configuration management tool. That's the old and is being replaced with Puppet. So to make sure you're using Puppet as the default configuration management system, make sure that Puppet is in your departmental include file. Enable activation key. This is the key that associates your machine with our RHN satellite and allows it to register with the satellite and get the appropriate updates. You always want to make sure your department is set and is set correctly. We're working in the test department. Our department is set for test. This next command sets up automated root passwords. We have a system in AFS that stores root passwords and can deploy them to all of the machines in your department and can change them on all of the machines in your department in an automated fashion.
You might be using this, or you might be using more localized passwords. This system is available for anyone on campus to use. Root is our keyword here. The department or group for the root password in question is next, followed by an encryption key. The list of systems administrators for a department works in a very similar way. Users is the key. There's the department or group name for the systems administrator list we want to pull, and the matching encryption key. Again, this lets us automatically handle the systems administrators on each machine, remove and add them as necessary, completely automated. The owner key sets up an alias for where root's email should go. You should create a mailing list for your department or some sort of alias that can collect these. Worst comes to worst, assign it to a NCSU, a Unity ID at ncsu.edu. That only goes to one person, but at least you'll get that email. Remedy is usually not suggested for this particular use because it doesn't really like getting emails from root. It thinks those are spam. So I would suggest to set up a mailing list for this purpose. If there's a problem with the Realm Linux machine, it will try to email this email address to let you know. We always disable SE Linux by default, and we've stated that to be explicit here. The following two keys here set up local and remote clusters. Clusters are sort of an advanced topic, so we're going to explicitly turn them off here. Back to Kvaim Gesto 2. We're going to copy our example to Kvaim Guest 02.unity.ncsu.edu. The name of the web kickstart config file must match the fully quantified domain name of the machine you're installing. So let's test. Does that name resolve in DNS? It does. It gives us our IP address. Next, we can do some advanced testing on our web kickstart. So let's go back up here to the Realm Linux management tools at secure.linux.ncsu.edu/rml tools. Click on Web Kickstart Tools. And type in our fully quantified domain name here at the IP or host name box. Hit Submit. This will generate the kickstart that will actually be sent to the machine to install it. And there, it is a little long and complex, but if you see this kickstart, you know the system is working and everything's in order. If there's an error, it'll display an error message and give you a hint about what to do. So, at this point, we're ready to install our first machine. I'm using KVM virtual machines for this demonstration. So to install that machine, I'm going to set it up with a proper name, have it accelerate. I've got its network configuration set, where its virtual image lives, but importantly, I've got the MAC address that matches the information in Proteus. So this little VM will start up and it will to Pixie boot, as I'm instructed to do. If you're installing a bare metal machine, usually hitting that F12 button during boot will cause it to Pixie boot. Once it's Pixie booted, this is what you should see. You see the OIT logo and the Pixie bootloader installer. Big warning by erasing your hard drive. This is where you want to be. At the boot prompt, type in that version string that you used in your web kickstart config. Server 6.x8664. This boots into the installed media that's got to match your web kickstart configuration. This downloads stuff from the TFTP server. downloads a lot of stuff. And finally starts the installation procedure. At this point, if the install pops up a blue screen and asks you what language you want to proceed with, you know there's a problem somewhere. The Web Kickstart installation mechanism is completely automated, so if you've gotten that question, something's gone wrong with the Web Kickstart generation. You might want to go back to the Web Kickstart tools and see if your Web Kickstart generates properly. And we move to graphical mode. It sets up our partitioning system. Notice that we didn't have to specify our partitioning system in our Web Kickstart config. It's going to use a default. Once we get here, the install will flip back to text mode, run some updates, and run configuration, and finally, your PostScripts. Next, Yum, the auto updater, will bring our system up to date. Here, Puppet, our configuration management tool, will lay down all of the configuration that makes Realm Linux into Realm Linux. At this point, the install is almost finished, and the machine will reboot shortly. All right, the machine's rebooting. It's booting the newest kernel. Now I'm going to hit the escape button so we can actually see the boot up process, rather than the nice little scrolly bar. KDump is rebuilt on boot. This is our first boot, so it's got to be rebuilt. On future reboots, that won't show as a warning. And this run of Puppet will correct the sendmail error that showed up on the screen here. Okay, our machine is now booted. Let's log in. I used a test account here, but this test account is in the list of system administrators for this department. So my Unity user ID and password work. I can get to my AFS space. Everything looks in order. Again, because my user ID is in the list of systems administrators, I can become root. That's my own password for the Sorcerer account. And there's the root prompt. That's it for this Realm Linux screencast. Thanks for watching.
So Jack, that was a horrible video. I couldn't read a thing on it. This video is on YouTube. I've got the link later on in this presentation. I think it's also on the Classmate webpage that everyone signed up for this class. Head over to YouTube, pull up the video, make it full screen, and set your resolution to 720p, and that should be fairly readable. I recorded it full resolution. It looked great. And then I had to actually make it into a standard high-definition video format. Details. Anyway, so now that we have these lovely fun videos, we don't need this or much of this. Root passwords and systems administrator lists. I did want to highlight that if you're using localized versions of a root password, the root PW key is what you're interested in. You hand that an MD5 password hash, and that will override the automated root password from AFS and use the hash that you've supplied. The flip side to that is there's not really an automated way to update that root password as the machine is in its life cycle. So if that created the file that disables the root passwords from AFS, and yes, it does. If that file were deleted, the root passwords from AFS would take over. You may get the default password, which is something you may not know. If that comes, send me a support ticket, and we can get that fixed up. Similarly to the list of systems administrators, the folks that become root, enable admin users is the way to specify a custom list of systems administrators for a particular machine. Hand it a list of space-delimited user IDs, and we'll put those in the appropriate place. To update those in the lifecycle of the machine, you'll have to edit the etc users.local file, the etc sudoers files. And there was a question? If you use, the question was, explain more about not being able to update the password during the life cycle of the machine. If you use the root password system out of AFS, we can easily update the encrypted MD5 hashes in AFS, and that applies to your complete department within the next 4 hours, updates every password on every machine. Great when somebody decides to no longer work for you. Great for security policy and all that stuff. Using the root PW keyword, it just lays down a hash on the machine. And there's not any tools that goes back and changes that hash at that point. So you would have to log in with SSH, become root, and change the password that way. You can still change the password. You still have complete control over what it is. We can still create some sort of system that would change it for you. It gives you more control over the root password at the expense of some of the automation. Awesome. Nods and approval. One more point about the system that I definitely want to mention. Please do not put your root password or the hash for your root password into Remedy. If you'd like to set up root passwords or change your root password for your Realm Linux machines, send me a support ticket, a Remedy ticket. I'll be glad to work with you to do that, but I will arrange a drop point in AFS for us to exchange the password or MD5 hashes, or we can use GPG encryption or some other secure method of communicating passwords and hashes. Mark GPG to be more formalized in support. I do too. I do too. Where's my manager? GPG is fun. I wish it were more supportable and more widely used. We've talked about root passwords. I left clusters out of the first training video because they are a little bit more complex and they are a little bit more confusing. There is the Web Kickstart keyword cluster that you can use in your Web Kickstart file. This doesn't actually configure clusters. Sorry. What this keyword does is it sets up an AFS PTS group, and it sets up every user in that PTS group to be able to log into the machine as a user. It doesn't give them root access. It just gives you the ability to create a PTS group, alter that PTS group in the future, and who's ever in that PTS group will have access to log in to this machine. Setting up other unprivileged user authorization just involves setting that user ID into etsyusers.local and etsyusers.local.base, which is a file that is included when etsyusers.local is built. Users.local is rebuilt every 4 hours on most Realm Linux machines, part of the list of systems administrators that come from AFS. Then there's etsyhosers.local, which is not automated, not widely used, but it's there just in case. Put a user in that file, and they will not be able to log in. A little bit more about actual clusters, which are not controlled by the cluster keyword. Clusters are kind of confusing and not used by too many people, so I try to be really specific with the terminology I use for clusters. A cluster is two sets of access group, a set of access groups that are denied access, a set of access groups that are granted access. So if you associate a cluster with your machine, when you log in, the first thing the machine does is check, are you in the deny access groups? And if you are, you're outright denied from logging into the machine. Next, it checks if you're in the allow access groups, and if you're in one of these access groups, you're granted access to the machine. Access groups used to be Unix user groups back when we used Hesiod. They're currently stored in LDAP. NCSU is probably the most common access group. It is the access group applied to every single account holder here at NC State University. There are access groups for the folks in the College of PAMS, for students in engineering, for employees for OIT. There are all sorts of various groups that some get used and some don't. There are local clusters. There are remote clusters. The local cluster controls who can log into the graphical terminal. I logged into my laptop through the X session so I could run a presentation. I'm logged into my laptop as a local user. Going through network access protocols like SSH are considered remote users. And the Web Kickstart syntax, as demonstrated in the video, is enable local cluster and enable remote cluster, and you pass that a single identifier. That identifier can be a cluster, or it can be an access group. And to be perfectly honest, using access groups is probably much more understandable, much more controllable, and folks just understand more how that grouping constructs work. A very popular setting would be enable local cluster space NCSU. That would explicitly grant any NCSU account holder to be able to log in at the local console. You might find that setting in student computer labs. Setting local cluster to NCSU is the Realm Linux default. However, when I set folks up with Web Kickstart, as I documented in the video we watched, I try to explicitly set each cluster to the none string, which explicitly turns those off. Okay, most people look fairly unconfused. Awesome. The video covered Web Kickstart installations, all this fun stuff. Testing, reprovisioning, decommissioning with Web Kickstart. You are welcome to install machines as much and as often as you like. In fact, we encourage you to do so to make sure that your install is tested, is bulletproof, completes all the steps you want to complete correctly. Please leave your Web Kickstart a config file in place in case you do need to reinstall that machine later. That also is an important piece in that chain of trust to make sure that machine was installed and configured by someone we know and trust. For decommissioning Realm Linux machines, turn the machine off, toss it in the surplus pile, and remove the Web Kickstart config. Everything else where that machine leaves footprints through our system at some point is automated, and those registrations and those footprints will disappear in 30 to 90 days. Common problems. The video mentioned a question about what language to use. If you see a question about what language to use, something's gone wrong in the install. Usually it's a syntax error or a problem parsing the Web Kickstart. And the Web Kickstart tools page will identify that. It'll tell you what the error message is. Sorry, I blurted out on the video, but my testing environment still exposed a couple things I didn't wish to expose to public. Other common problems deal with the network card. Is the network card recognized? Did DHCP work appropriately? It used to be more common that a machine would boot up and PXE boot from interface 1 and then try to do the install over interface 2. That shouldn't be a problem anymore, but that's something to be aware of if you start having problems with multiple interfaces. In any case, if you see that question, usually you can hold down the Alt key, press the F3 button, and switch over to a virtual console that will have some debug logs about the install and should tell you what's gone wrong. If the machine has gotten later into the install process into X and something happens, you want to look at those logs, it's Control, Alt, and F3 will switch over back to that log virtual console. Another common installation problem is an error message that says installation tree does not match boot media. Most of the time, you have a different version key in your Web Kickstart than you do than what you typed in at the PXE boot prompt. If you're using boot CDs, that used to be a common problem when the boot CD wouldn't be the exact same version as the install tree, but most of those boot CDs have been phased out and replaced with a CD that emulates a PXE boot. So on managing Realm Linux machines. Before we had configuration management, and still to this day, the AFS cron system was really the go-to method for managing machines. There is a directory in AFS for each department. If that directory is not there, send me a support call and I'll create it for you. That directory has several cron directories inside of it. Cron.wsr, cron.hourly, cron.update. And any scripts you put in those directories will be run on all of your machines in that department on that interval. Cron.wsr is every 20 minutes. It's usually designed for emergency crons. I've included a footnote link here in the presentation with some more information about how to write emergency crons. They're kind of handy sometimes. There's boot time scripts from AFS. To be honest, this is not widely used and will probably go away in the future. Most of that is slowly being supplanted by our configuration management tools. Bconfig 2 is what we've been using for Realm Linux 6. It was the right tool at the time. It had the right infrastructure to handle a larger environment with many systems administration groups scattered through the environment. Groups that work together, some work separately, some, and it allowed us to flex to handle that fairly well. In a couple years after that, Puppet gained many of the features that we were missing when we first started looking at configuration management. It has a concept called environments, which match our concept of departments really excellently. And so that's one of the main reasons why we've decided to move over toward Puppet. On the presentation here are the directories for where your Puppet and Bconfig repositories go. If your department doesn't have one, send me a support ticket. We'll get that created for you. Random best practices. Are the Windows AD folks in here? Okay, Billy is here. One of my pet peeves is making naming schemes that make sense. Doctor Who companions do not a naming scheme make. Billy says he lost the vote on that one. So I like good naming schemes because it becomes easy to become regular expressions to further select machines you want to operate on. If you push out a cron script, that cron script runs on every machine in that department. A regular expression, like in this example, helps me fine-tune that cron script to only affect my Kerberos slave servers. I have no idea what the next Doctor Who companion is going to be, so once he or she's revealed to the world, I don't want to update all of my Puppet configs. So Richard raised the issue of the naming scheme that I use, a lot of folks in OIT use, doesn't work with a simple sort algorithm because the index number is in the middle rather than the end. And that's a very valid point. Were I designing that system today, the index number would be at the end. Realm Linux Management Tools. The Realm Linux Management Tools is a web app that hopes to ease some of the information gathering issues for Realm Linux, as well as some other tasks. It started out as a simple API that distributed root passwords from AFS with the appropriate encryption to each machine, and quickly grew into what we know and love today. The Realm Linux Management Tools continues that trusted versus untrusted concept. If your machine is labeled as supported in the Realm Linux Management Tools, we know it's been installed by Web Kickstart. I know it's consistently been on the network. Reasons it may not be marked as supported in the Realm Linux Management Tools is because it wasn't installed by Web Kickstart, which is usually pretty rare, or the machine fell off the network for some spurious and unknown reason. If it falls off the network long enough, Realm Linux Management Tools thinks it's gone away and goes ahead and decommissions it, and then it suddenly reappears on the network. Puppet reports, Puppet status will be in the new version of the Realm Linux Management Tools that I should push out really this week or next week. I was hoping to get it done for today, but fate conspired against me. Common problems, common statistics, being able to set and change your departments in the new version. It almost works, I promise. As Tyler found bugs in that the other day. Probably the most common, popular tool in there is the Web Kickstart tools. Future plans for Realm Linux management tools. One of the big future plan is using Puppet to be able to handle Web Kickstart-less installs. So we have a configuration management system that's capable of doing most all that we need to do. And since images are very popular as well nowadays, especially the VCL, we're trying to work toward a system where we can more or less bless an existing install, run the configuration management tool, and have that install be transmuted into a Realm Linux install that is fully supported. Also, I'm trying to set up Realm Linux management tools so it manages Realm Linux access permissions, so that Billy can go to the Realm Linux management tools website and say, I have a new employee, his name is Billy Bob, he has access to these engineering departments, and it takes care of all the details. Currently, you have to send me or Brendan a remedy ticket. Other client-side tools for Realm Linux management tools. NCSU Bless is the answer for machines that for some reason are marked as not supported in the Realm Linux management tools interface. Log in as your Realm user, the same user that has permission to install machines with Web Kickstart, run NCSU Bless. NCSU Bootstrap is run during the Web Kickstart install. It sets up Puppet or Bconfig. You can also use it to transmute your machine from Bconfig to Puppet. However, it doesn't port any of the existing configuration specification from Bconfig to Puppet. That's up to you. NCSU Rename tickles the machine and Realm Linux management tools in all the right places to change the fully quantified domain name of the machine. It doesn't know about Puppet yet, so there are a couple of details that it doesn't handle currently. NCSU Client, NCSU Report are normally run by cron jobs and not by us systems administrators. So this is what the new version that should have been out last week that might be out this week actually looks like. It looks pretty similar to the old version. You'll notice there's a spot to change departments. There's a lot more actions down here listed for viewing the Puppet inventory, which is kind of handy. Viewing Puppet run reports. Folks have long asked me for a way to delete hosts, so I added a delete button. However, if you delete a Realm Linux client out of the Realm Linux management tools that's still alive, it will check back in and recreate itself as non-supported. However, if you're just cleaning up after you've decommissioned machines, have at it. Statistics that Realm Linux management tools creates. Yes, there's a question? The question was, does hitting the delete host button in the Realm Linux management tools remove the host from RHN? And it does not. Again, we have an automated process that cleans up RHN because I don't expect folks to keep up with that. Deploying additional software. We highly recommend that folks deploy software with RPM packages in Yum repositories. The simple thing to do is create a Yum repo file in the etc yum repos.d directory. I've given the format in the slide. The man pages for Yum are pretty complete, so that should answer most questions you have. The create repo tool is in its own package and not installed by default. Who knew? But that tool is the tool you run over a directory that transmutes it into a Yum repository. Some best practices with Yum repositories. Yum repositories are fully supported in Puppet. If you're going down the Puppet route, I would definitely suggest you look at those there. Updates do run nightly, which include any additional repositories that you might add. There's always the question between updating every night versus updating during maintenance windows versus updating when people remember it. Realm Linux works on the theory that updating every night usually gives us less problems than not updating at all. Sometimes we do get the bogus package from Red Hat. It happens, but we pay Red Hat to support and provide quality packages, and usually we get what we deserve. Ooh, I'm going to have to edit that part out. Usually we get what we pay for. Really, there have been, in the last 10 years, I think I can count on one hand the number of packages that Red Hat's pushed that have truly been craptastic and have really blown up in our faces. Usually, they're an excellent supplier of packages that behave appropriately. But Jack, I've still got important things that I just can't have updated on a nightly basis. What do I do? Usually, I tell people to identify the packages that are important to what their machine does. I run OpenAFS servers. There's 3 main sets of packages that are really important to an AFS server. The OpenAFS packages, the kernel modules, especially the OpenAFS kernel module, which of course depends on the installed and running kernel. So I use the exclude keyword in etc yum.conf, and I exclude those packages, and you can see from the slide it supports package globs, and that removes any package matching those globs from any future Yum run. When you do get around to updating your OpenAFS servers, the Yum update -- disable excludes equals all turns off the exclude mechanism. There's some details in the man page that you may want to read about how that option specifically works and how you can disable certain excludes but not others, which is kind of handy. We in OIT host Yum repository, so you don't have to. Send me a remedy ticket, support ticket, and I'll be glad to set that up for you. Those live in AFS. They're backed up. They're served out by a redundant pool of servers. Access controls are done by standard htaccess files. So if you only want your machines in your building to see that Yum repository, that's exactly how you would set that up. The content is completely under your control. I'll even give you the AFS space. The web URL that they're usually available at is there. One piece of advice about setting these things, setting up Yum repositories up, is once you set them up, they're difficult to change without having to go back and reconfigure each machine, which, if you're using Puppet, is easy. But I would suggest you'll be given a directory that is the name of your department. You should make subdirectories in there of products or projects that you're working on. The next subdirectory should be a version like 5 or 6. That matches the Red Hat Enterprise Linux version. And the next directory is either a sub-repository underneath that or the architecture in question. The Realm Linux Yum repositories work that way. My department is CLS for no good reason. That's my base directory. Under that directory is a Realm Linux directory, which contains the Yum repositories for Realm Linux. There are several others there as well. The next directory down is a version. There's several sub-repositories. Those may not be useful for everyone. but food for thought. And finally, the specific architecture. So now we move forward toward Puppet. Again, Puppet is what we're going toward in the future for configuration management. I think it's a lot simpler to use than bconfig ever was. I was expecting cheers. Just groans in relief. Again, Puppet has grown a lot and has really proven itself of being able to handle an institution like NC State that is large and complex, with different levels of authorization, different domains of control, and keeping those relatively all controlled and all manageable. How many of you guys are at the presentation where I explained how bconfig and Git and configuration management worked in general about 2 years ago? Awesome. 4 folks. We could talk about that in depth, but really all folks need to know is that departments work in a hierarchy. I have a test department that I really should have used in that video I just showed. It would have kept me from having to blur out the Web Kickstart tools page. The OIT CLS test department is a child of the OIT CLS department, which is a child of OIT, which is a child of the special reserved root department. No machines are actually in the root department. No person can really claim the root department as their own. It is a special and magical reserved place that forms the root of the tree. As I mentioned before, Puppet has a concept called environment. So when a Realm Linux machine installs and is configured to use Puppet, what it does during its postscript is it says, can I connect to the OIT CLS test Puppet environment? If that works, we move on. If it doesn't, it tries the OIT CLS department, the OIT CLS environment, then the OIT environment, and finally the root environment. If you don't have a Puppet repository set up, the root environment is there to catch anyone that doesn't have that set up for them. Puppet environments, repositories are controlled to Git, which is what we use for bconfig, so that should be very much the same. Use Google to look up the documentation for Git. Their website is really quite excellent, and it's included in the documentation section of the presentation. So I'm going to give folks sort of a quick tour of what's inside a Puppet repository in hopes that that sort of keys together in your mind how things plug together and the workflow of the process. Sort of as with bconfig, I'm not going to get too deep into the actual details of the syntax of the Puppet language. The Puppet documentation is really excellent, so I'm going to point folks there first. If you've got questions about configs that you're working on, you're still more than welcome to send me a support ticket or contact me on Jabber and ask me to take a look, and I'll be glad to help. So, this is my OIT CLS repository for Puppet, and in the top-level directory, it has a couple files. Site.pp is the important file. That's the entry level for your configuration. When Puppet runs, it looks for site.pp and grabs it and goes. You shouldn't need to edit that file. It's set up for you. That file includes defaults.pp, which again does some additional setup and configuration of some defaults. Some very handy things like when Puppet changes a file, it actually stores that file in the bucket. So if worse comes to worse, we can actually go through the Puppet logs in your machine, find which file changed, and go and fetch that file again. I don't know, it was handy for me. In the In your repository is a manifest directory, which contains PP files that you provide that contain all of your Puppet nodes. We'll get there in a minute. There's a modules directory, which contains a number of subdirectories, like the Realm Linux subdirectory, the Puppet subdirectory, EPEL, and a few others. When you create Puppet configuration, modules are your workhorse. They're your butlers and maids. They go about obeying your commands, taking care of all the details, doing all the cleaning and sweeping for you. What I usually suggest is when you get a Puppet repository, create a module for your department. So I created CLS here. Modules follow a pretty easy format. They need a manifest directory. And that's really the only directory that's required. But the files directories and the templates directories are also pretty useful. Inside the manifest directory, you'll need an init.pp file, which I've highlighted here in red and shown on the right-hand side of the screen. This file is the entry point for this module. It defines the CLS class, the top-level class that this module provides. Modules provide classes. So as part of my general departmental configs, I want to change the mottd file on my machines. So I've defined my CLS class. I've used a file resource. The name of the file resource is the file you wish to modify on disk. That's followed by a number of attributes. Group, owner, mode. Those should make sense to everybody. The source attribute tells the Puppet client, here's URI, go out and fetch the content for this file. Usually what you want to use is the Puppet protocol here. So Puppet followed by 2 slashes. We only have one set of Puppet servers, so we leave the server out and it uses that same server. Modules tells the Puppet server to look inside the modules. The CLS module specifically, and grab the mottd file out of the CLS modules. So here's your modules. There's a CLS directory. And in the files directory is the mottd file that we're looking for. So the path provided follows a format that doesn't exactly follow the directory structure. You'll always use modules, the name of the module, and then the name of the file from the files directory. Awesome. Everyone looks semi-unconfused. I've listed out what my example mottd file is and where it lives in the Puppet repository. So I have one machine that I want to install Nginx on. Nginx is an alternative web server, and it's relatively simple to set up, hence my use of it as a demonstration. This guy's a little bit more complex. We define the Nginx class as a child of the CLS class, so CLS : Nginx. This first line, include EPEL, brings in the EPEL module, which is a standard module I ship with all of the Realm Linux Puppet repositories. The package resource is the name of the package, Nginx in this case. The attribute ensure, we want to ensure that that package is installed. That's followed by a service resource. Again, we want to modify the Nginx service. So if you're familiar with the service command in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that's the same stuff. There's several attributes to manage services. We want to ensure that that service is running when the Puppet client runs. We want to enable that service to start on boot, so enable is set to true. There are a number of attributes that deal with init files that are poorly written and badly behaved. Has status and has restart are two of those. We can set those for true. To most cases, most of the init scripts we deal with on a regular basis are fairly well behaved. Finally, there's another file resource. This configures the Nginx configuration file. Owner, group, and mode, those make sense. Instead of source, I've used the content attribute. The content attribute includes the content of the file with the information that the Puppet client receives from the Puppet server, rather than the source attribute, which says, hey, go fetch this content from a potentially different source. The template function in the Puppet language renders a template, and the path you give that function is the name of the module followed by the template. So again, in our modules, we have our CLS module templates live in the template directory, and there in that directory is the template we're using. So templates are pretty similar. If you've worked with the Ginshi templates that we've used in bconfig, the concepts are all the same, but the syntax isn't. Puppet uses Ruby's ERB templates. It's also fairly well documented. There's a great starter in the Puppet documentation on Puppet Labs website about how to get started using them. This is a very simple template, and the only thing I'm filling in here is the fully quantified domain name of the client machine. That's actually a fact reported from the client to the Puppet server. The Puppet server renders the configuration, sticks that fact in this template there. Question, yes. The less than % combination size. The question was, what characters do we need to escape in templates? The less than % and the % greater than obviously need to be escaped. But I do not think $ needs to be escaped as it did in Ginshi, which should make these files these templates easier to use. But yeah, check back with me and I can have a better answer for that. So you have written the CLS module. You have your departmental configs that apply everywhere. You have a class that configures an additional machine to be a server. How do you map those to machines? Machines in Puppet speak are nodes. And nodes live in the top-level manifest directory in various .pp files. You can create however many PP files, organized the way that makes sense for you, the way that makes sense for your environment. Node is the key word. It's followed by a regular expression. Anyone know Perl? Anyone? Crickets? What? Most people here have some familiarity with Perl. The regular expressions work exactly as they do in Perl. Again, this is one I like great naming schemes. My main test machine is kvmguest02.unity.ncsu.edu. So I've made the first node that matches that. I include Realm Linux, which is the default Realm Linux module that makes Realm Linux sort of happen. I've included the CLS module, which is my departmental base class. And I've included the CLS Nginx class for that machine as well. So not only is it a Realm Linux machine, it is a CLS machine, it is also a CLS Nginx server. KVM guest 02 gets matched before Puppet gets to the second node in the example, but all my other KVM guest machines match that regular expression. So only one machine is an Nginx server. The rest of my test machines are also Realm Linux and CLS servers. Does that make sense in a basic sort of way? Question? The question was, does it hit the initial match or does it match everything that actually matches, each node that matches? Only one node will match your machine. And when we're dealing with regular expressions, it'll be the first node that it finds that it matches. Another question? The order does matter. We use regular expressions, or I will suggest you use regular expressions, because what we're really matching against is the name of the certificate that the Puppet client has, which is slightly different from your host name, but I'm trying to design things so that you can just use host names here. If you flip the order of the two in this file, all of my KVM guest machines would match the one up top, this one. If I reverse the node order, the KVM guest 02 node would never get matched. Yes, top-down order for regular expressions. If you know the full certificate name, you can state the full certificate name, and that's matched for the higher priority. So the question was, do certificates match the specific instance of a Realm Linux machine? And the answer to that is yes. Each Realm Linux machine, when it installs and configures itself with Puppet, will get a certificate that Puppet uses to identify and authenticate the machine. And that certificate is specific to that host name and the specific instance of that install. Billy is looking very confused. Alphabetical order is how it processes all the files. So, testing with Puppet is a lot easier than bconfig. With bconfig, you more or less had to make changes. You had to commit them, wait till they got to the bconfig server, apply the changes, see all of the errors, and repeat the cycle. Puppet has a serverless mode, which is really handy for testing. Using Puppet apply, give it your module path, which is the path to the modules directory in your AFS Puppet repository. And as the second option, give it the full AFS path to your site.pp, and it will perform all the configuration tasks locally on your machine. And if you have an error in the configuration that you're building, it will tell you something useful like, there's a syntax error on this file on this line. bconfig never did that. So you can test your configuration without having to commit it, without having to wait till it gets to the Puppet servers. So you should have much more faster, there's good English, much more faster rapid development cycles. Buzzword compliant. Continuing the example I used in the previous set of slides, to get your changes committed, each file that you've changed needs to be git added. And I have added all the files that I have talked about in my CLS module, along with the kvms.pp as my node file. And then I say git commit and give that a useful commit message. The Puppet servers look for changes every 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, changes are effective on the Puppet server. And at that point, you can run Puppet in agent mode on one of your workstations or your test machines. Handit --test. That gives you a color-coded verbose output that tells you exactly what changed, what problems encountered, if there were any, each step along the path. When you look in RML tools, you'll see Puppet runs and Puppet reports in RML tools. They have a very similar output that --test gives you, except for the colors. color. It shouldn't be in a database. Yes, test is... Yes, dash dash test is like verbose. It does apply changes. There is a dash dash no op option to prevent Puppet from applying changes. After you git commit, changes propagate to the Puppet servers in 5 minutes. Puppet on the client side runs every hour. So after you commit changes, they should be effective on your machine within the next hour. Yes, that runs part of the Realm cron system in etccron.hourly. So next steps with Puppet, I encourage everyone to head toward the documentation. Puppet is a for-profit company, and they've done a lot of work and a lot of effort into building excellent documentation. Realizing that as documentation improves, more people will use Puppet, more people will want to buy some of their advanced services. So their documentation is really quite excellent. Puppet 3.0 came out a couple months ago. Our infrastructure is based on the Puppet 2.7. So when you're looking through documentation, be aware of that. On the Puppet documentation website, the first thing they throw at you is 2 cheat sheets. One of them details out how to lay out modules, the directory structure, where certain files go. The other one lists out all the common resources, like file, service, package, how to use those resources, what are the different attributes you can give each resource, and I think I use that cheat sheet every time I look at Puppet. So go print that out and stick that on your wall. And if you're familiar with that cheat sheet, which is 2 pages, you can do Puppet. It flows together that well. Also, please feel free to look through your Realm Linux Puppet repository, especially the Realm Linux module or some of the other modules that I provided with the repository. There are lots of working examples there. There's an example PP file in the top-level manifest directory that also give you some examples. To start looking there first as well. So moving forward to getting support. Everyone knows, please send me a support ticket, linux@help.ncsu.edu. Myself or Brendan or Josh or somebody will hopefully get to your question within 24 hours at the most. I had a lovely gentleman email me Tuesday of last week and had a very specific question that was a little on the time-sensitive side, and I wasn't here all last week. So I apologized to him and then forwarded his call into Remedy and told him that I had forwarded his call into Remedy, that this would make sure that somebody would get back to him shortly. And Scott in PAMS grabbed the call before I could even look at it again. I really encourage folks to ask questions, whether it's on mailing lists, Jabber, or support tickets. Let me give you an example for this. So you have a problem with your Realm Linux machine. It's resetting your root password every 4 hours. You keep changing it. The Realm Linux machine keeps changing it back. You don't know what's the matter with the machine. Should you, A, send in a support ticket, or B, remove the cron binary from your system? I have had people remove the cron binary from their system. Ask questions, please. Do not remove cron. online reading. Realm Linux documentation is in the Realm Linux wiki, which is at secure.linux.ncsu.edu/moin. There's a link to it on secure.linux.ncsu.edu. All the Realm Linux documentation is there. It's editable by anyone with an NCSU account. There's a login button on top. Log in with your account. Please help me fix my spelling. If you have something to add, a few sentences that elucidates a concept better than what I've done, please feel free to add those. If something doesn't make sense in that documentation or you still have questions, feel free to ask me about it. But that's the point of where I'm going to point folks for documentation for examples. Jack, where can I find the Puppet documentation for those cheat sheets? I'll probably point you to the wiki. If you're working with RPMs, you probably want the Red Hat RPM guide. This book is online. The online version is more up-to-date than this book here from the Red Hat Press. Sadly, this book is out of print. I've seen it go for $300 on eBay. So if you have one of these and it's in good condition, this is some of the best documentation for building RPMs, working with RPMs, and the like. Red Hat has documentation as well. Their documentation is reasonable. A lot of their documentation is protected by an access control wall. And Martin sighs, he sighs audibly. So if you'd like to get at the Red Hat documentation and encounter the lovely login wall, send me a support ticket. I will probably send you a user ID and password that makes no sense whatsoever, but it will get you in. For folks gaining more familiarity with Linux, and systems administration, Linux in general, I will point you to the Linux Documentation Project. They have lots of various guides, most of which are fairly up-to-date. Everything from writing your first kernel module to public relations to how to be a systems administrator. And some of those can be really valuable. I use the guide for bash scripting often because it's very complete, it's very simple, it's full of examples. I've mentioned the Puppet Learning Center. Here's the URL for the Git website. The Git website has several pieces of documentation for folks that are familiar with CVS or for folks that are familiar with Subversion. And it maps the Subversion and CVS concepts directly over to Git. So you can go there, print out the cheat sheet that applies to your knowledge base, and get started with using Git really quite quickly. Some of us like real books. I don't know, sometimes it's just kind of handy to heft something that's heavier than a small child. The first book up here, Instant Puppet 3 Starter, you can get a hardback version of it. You can get Kindle version from Amazon. You can get an ebook format in a variety of formats directly from the publisher, and I've listed that URL. This book has really awesome reviews, reviews from people I trust, so I don't hesitate to recommend this book, but I haven't read it yet. The ebook is $10. It is a little specific to Puppet 3, but from what I know about the book, it is written in such a way that the Puppet 3 differences really aren't that important. And I think it would still be very useful for us, even if we're using Puppet 2.7. The next on the list is EV-NAMUS Unix and Linux Systems Administration Handbook. That came out in 2010. EV-NAMUS produces some really excellent books, especially if you're lesser experienced with Linux and Unix systems administration. Those are great books to have. I have the third one, the Linux Administration Handbook, also known as the Purple Book, because it got that popular. This is 2006. It's getting to the point where it's a little harder to find. It's been superseded by the Unix and Linux Systems Administration Handbook. But both books are very similar. The newer one is a little bit more up to date. Again, very excellent book. Finally, Tom Limonsetti's Practice of System and Network Administration. This book is not really Linux or Realm Linux specific, but it's really referred to as the Bible of systems administration. Tom really believes in systems administration as a profession, as a professional profession. How many of us have a degree in systems administration? Okay, for the record, no one raised their hands. Tom believes in giving people degrees in systems administration. Systems administration is not just a, hey, can you guys kind of help me make the computers work? And he believes in documenting the principles and techniques that make systems administration work better, the techniques that are proven to be successful. I have this randomly bookmarked disaster recovery and data integrity. There's stuff in here about hiring and firing systems administrators, chapters for technical or non-technical management, chapters about being happy at your job, chapters about why we deploy certain hardware in server rooms versus hardware on people's desktops. It's really an excellent read. You can almost tell I've read it like a book. That's the end of this lovely presentation. I've listed some of the URLs of interesting websites here on this slide. Thanks a bunch for putting up with me trying to get this presentation recorded for posterity. And at this point, I'll open things up to questions and discussion and feedback for how lovely this presentation went.
Actually, it's the best one you've ever done, Jack.
T. Martin says this is the best one I've ever done. That's kind of scary. Tyler.
So why haven't we chosen to go with Puppet 3.0? Is that just because it's just so new and we're kind of afraid to push things towards that?
Why haven't we decided to go with Puppet 3.0? Mostly because we deployed the entire infrastructure at 2.7 before Puppet 3.0 came out. And so that's on the horizon, and I expect that upgrade to be a whole lot less painful than some of the bconfig upgrades.
Is there any high-in-the-sky timeline for that move to 3?
Is there a timeline for move to Puppet 3.0? No, there's not. I haven't gotten too much feedback about it, so feedback would encourage that. Timelines for Puppet, I hope to announce a date this summer where Puppet will become the default configuration management tool for Realm Linux. So if you install a Realm Linux 6 box and you do not specify a configuration management tool, it will use Puppet. Right now, it uses bconfig. If you have existing setups that are set up to use bconfig, those setups will continue to work and continue to install that way.
How much longer are you going to keep the bconfig stuff running?
How much longer will I keep bconfig running? Probably for the majority of the lifetime of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, or that we support RHEL 6 here on campus.
Does Comtech have servers using it?
Does Comtech have servers using bconfig? I believe so.
Okay, we're doomed.
I reserve the right to edit these questions. Gary.
Can you make this presentation available online somewhere?
The presentation is available online. It's on the Classmate website for this class.
Oh, okay.
And I'll stick it on the wiki as well.
Thank you.
Tyler?
With the Puppet updates, is that something which runs in the background with the Puppet daemon, which runs periodically, or is it ran via command over Realmcron?
How do Puppet updates work? Puppet has a built-in daemon mode that deploys changes hourly, sleeps for a random hour-ish period, then deploys changes again. The Puppet documentation suggests that we use cron for institutions at scale. So I've used a Realm cron to run Puppet and not run it as a daemon. So occasionally, when I'm testing and when I've typoed something, I'll get Puppet running as a daemon, and then I'll get emails when the cron runs that it's tried to run Puppet, and another Puppet is already running because it's trying to run both as a daemon and a cron. That's sort of the one caveat I've had there. Other questions about Puppet?
You mentioned email there. Is there any notion of becoming more secure by using like PGP or emails or SNMP or other traffic mechanisms to communicate from the admin tools versus depending upon AFS mounts? Because this might allow things like remote users that weren't AFS in the future.
Questions about security and Puppet and AFS. One of the goals I have, because it's been requested by numerous people, is to reduce the dependencies on AFS. And Puppet provides an infrastructure so that we can securely identify a machine, transmit encrypted data to it, and takes care of any of the underlining administration tasks that usually happen over AFS. So like the root password system, the list of system administrators, that's not run by Puppet, that runs from a script out of AFS. I would like to move that into Puppet in the future, and that's the plan. At this point, I don't plan to make AFS an optional component of Realm Linux. There are questions that must be answered before we can move in that direction, and they've not been answered.
Okay, we'll just ask you the next one in this presentation.
Like, what do I do with your home directory space? How do I've gotten questions before of folks that have NFS mounts, folks that have home directories in AFS, folks that have home directories locally, and they sort of expect me to grant them their home directory to be whatever NFS local home directory is on that particular system. And I don't necessarily know which home directory you may have on that particular system that is different from another system in a different network. So to map you to the correct home directory, if we have a system of multiple home directories, I've got to have some sort of a map of what home directories are available to which networks, on which computers. And it gets complex quickly, because I've got to be able to put you somewhere in a useful directory. Other questions? Gary.
Guy next to Gary. You mentioned certificates earlier. So each of the client machines end up with a cert that's auto-generated for them?
Yes.
What OIDs are enabled in the cert? Just client off?
What OIDs are enabled in the Puppet cert? I may choose to edit this question for posterity, both client and server.
I'm glad with that.
Oh.
That means I can do IPsec tunnels between my Windows and Linux boxes.
In the future, I'm hoping to use those certificates as an authentication mechanism with the Realm Linux management tools as well, because that works well together there. Even if the security folks would rather me not have the server OID turned on. Richard?
What cert chain is it chained off of?
It's not.
So it's just a Puppet?
Puppet really only supports having its own self-signed CA. That is a serious bug and something that has had a lot of addressing in Puppet 3. So I'm hoping in the future, when Puppet supports chain CAs better, I can take the existing Puppet CA, have it signed by the ADCA, the NCSU, we like the CA this week, and get that chain slightly more official. Tyler?
When you register a Puppet node client with the Puppet server, I know there is a certificate which gets offered to the server, and the server has to accept that or bless it or some sort of magic that way. How are you handling that? I guess this is something on first time install. You have some sort of cron running on the server perhaps that checks it out. And separately, if we're trying to convert bconfig machines to Puppet, whenever we make that switch, at what stage are those certificates accepted?
Ooh, certificate signing in Puppet. When Puppet first runs on a client, it generates a public-private X509 key set, and it also generates a CSR, a certificate signing request. Same CSR you would give to Faulty if you wanted them to sign the certificate on your web server. It uploads that signing request to the Puppet master, and the Puppet master sits on it. At that point, the NCSU Bootstrap script makes an XML RPC call to the Realm Linux management tools that says, hey, I just registered. This is what I have my authentication to RML tools. This is what my Puppet certificate is. Can you go and sign my Puppet certificate? So the Realm Linux management tools then sends a API request to the Puppet server, gets that certificate signed, and then the NCSU Bootstrap script runs Puppet again on the client, and it pulls down the signed certificate.
So it's the Bootstrap thing which does the magic?
So it's the Bootstrap, the NCSU Bootstrap script that does all the magic.
Okay.
And you had a question about converting?
Yes, so I mean, I'm guessing if we're going to be converting, you told us to run the NCSU Bootstrap script anyway, so I guess that would handle...
If you want to convert from bconfig to Puppet, run NCSU Bootstrap -- Puppet.
Okay.
And that will attempt to connect to your department's Puppet environment.
Okay.
Caveat, none of the configuration bconfig moves over.
Jack, is there any likelihood that a newly installed machine, if you're not completely set up for Puppet, but you've got a repository, would start acting like that? I have one that's behaving strangely. That's going to talk to Tyler about what they do.
Common errors I see with Puppet are when you have a syntax error in your Puppet repository. And at install time, when we're doing that initial, how do I connect to which Puppet environment, at that point in time, the NCSU Bootstrap script can't tell the difference between this environment doesn't exist versus this environment has a syntax error and doesn't work properly.
Look at it more and then
So in that case, it tries to find an apparent repository.
I may drop your ticket in.
Sure.
Not what I'm seeing.
Tickets are good.
Are you done with the development of Puppet and just in the testing phase now, or where are you at in that?
We're mostly in the testing beta gamma phase. The most useful testing that folks could do is set up more machines with Puppet to make sure the infrastructure works at scale. Changes to the Puppet spec are quite few and far between at this point. There's a couple details I want to address, but they're all fairly minor. And if folks have suggestions of stuff they would like me to include or fix or change, please let me know. Puppet modules, if I can tangent on my own questions, Puppet modules are designed to be shared. If you read enough on the Puppet website, you'll find yourself at a place called Puppet Forge, which is a series of Puppet modules maintained by strange people on the internet that they've made available. And the idea is you can download a Puppet module, use that Puppet module from your node declaration, and can instantiate on your machine whatever that person is configured. So if some random person on the internet has configured a DNS server, you could, in theory, use that module to configure a DNS server on your machine, no matter if it's Debian or CentOS or whatever. Clearly, your mileage may vary. But what I think is important for us is learning how that we can share Puppet modules across different Puppet repositories. In OIT land, in OIT land, we're working on a Unity Puppet module, which has some additional monitoring, some additional safety checks. It has some lovely functionality to block bad hosts. So if an attacker attacks our main website, those IPs get into a database, and those IPs become blocked from all of our servers. And if we can spread that infrastructure more, I think a lot of people would find advantage there. However, that's not Puppet code that we want to be in the master Realm Linux repository, which is an open source project, if that makes any sense, because there are quite a few details and passwords and such there.
So we need to figure out a good way to know where the river of death flows, really.
So Brendan and I are actively working on trying to figure out how that might work, how folks would delineate authorization, to figure out which departments could use which shared modules, and that kind of stuff.
Lots of many things that have to be kept away separate.
This sounds like a potential good use for the NCSU Git service. Yes.
Indeed. Brendan, Billy, and
Unless you put it in AFS.
Brendan, myself, and Billy have been talking about putting Puppet repositories in the NCSU Git GitHub appliance, so folks could manage their Puppet repositories via that user interface. We see a lot of advantage there. We just haven't done it yet.
Well, you were talking specifically about the ability to give other people
Sorry,
vision into certain things. You would be able to declare other folks who could view just specific modules.
Sorry, I misinterpreted. You were talking about the open stuff. I was thinking about the closed stuff because I'm worried about it. Yeah. You want to have everything we can get out there where everybody can get to it. That's good.
I was
saying you had access to folder.
yes.
Well, you do by whatever users you have. Yeah.
I think we're agreeing. I'm not sure.
We've got code. We've got code to do some of it already. You may want to talk to Tyler and
He may want to talk to them.
yeah,
Tyler's good to talk to.
Nah.
that stuff that we took off of the senior design stuff and generalized.
So anything further? Excellent. Well, thanks for coming, everyone.